Okay, let's start. Hi everyone, welcome to the Waterstones Pride Panel event featuring YA authors Jen St. Jude, Brenna Nation, and Cameron Garrett. I'm Tolu Akingbada from @Tolu's Universe on TikTok, and I'll be chairing this evening's discussion. I'm very excited for it. So tonight we have the thrilling opportunity to talk about all things Sapphic romance and queer literature with some incredible authors, and it's my great pleasure to introduce them all to you. So first we have Jen St. Jude, the author of the heartbreaking and stunning If Tomorrow Doesn't Come, a story about queer first love and mental health struggles, all set during a time when the world is coming to an end. Thank you, Jen. And also joining us is Brenna Nation, the author of The Shattered Lands, a captivating enemies to lovers fantasy novel about a long-lost princess and the dark witch who threatens to destroy the princess's kingdom. Welcome, Brenna. And finally, we have Cameron Garrett, whose latest novel is a romantic comedy called Friday I'm in Love, celebrating Black joy and queer pride. It's about a teen who's determined to throw the ultimate coming out party. Jen, Brenna, and Cameron, who you can all see on the screen now, all touch on sapphic romance and coming of age themes in different ways in their work. And I am super, super, super excited to talk about their books with them today. So without further ado, let's get started. And please don't forget to submit your questions into the Q&A function for later, which we'll be coming back to. So how's everyone doing today? Let's just warm up a little bit.
Really good.
Yeah, I'm sweating. It's really hot here.
Summer vibes. So I'll start with the first question because I know everyone just wants to get to them. So, what does sapphic romance mean to you, and why has it been important to display this representation in your books? We're starting off strong. So, whoever wants to start can go first. Otherwise, I'll pick.
Not the threats to pick.
Yeah, the threat.
I can start if you'd like. I think for me, I didn't really grow up with a lot of representation at all, and so it took me so long to figure out who I was, because I didn't really see myself portrayed in any meaningful way on TV and or in books, I guess. Not that those books didn't exist, but they were either kind of like you had to really seek them out, or I was scared of them, or, it just didn't feel like a comfortable thing for me to read or watch. And I really, really think if there had been more representation, I would have found myself a lot sooner and avoided a lot of pain in my life, and potentially opened myself up to new opportunities. So I know my book is just one version of what sapphic love could look like, as every book is. But I think the more that we have, the more representation there is, the sooner people will figure out who they are and feel more comfortable reading these books, because there's so many beautiful books out there now.
Yeah,
I agree. I grew up in the South, and so like the heart of the Bible Belt, and so there wasn't hardly any representation, and what was there, I really wasn't allowed to interact with. And I found as I got older and I got brave enough to actually read the books, most of them ended in tragedy. There was like a lot of heartbreaking stories on the shelf. So it's really nice to see sapphic media pushing forward and, getting the happy endings that I think we all deserve. So.
Yeah, I think I have a similar but different experience where I didn't have a ton of books that I felt represented sapphic girls, but at the same time, there were one or two that were really important to me. And they sort of changed the way I thought, like they blew my mind. And one of them was Georgia Peaches and Other Forbidden Fruit by J. Robin Brown. And it's about a girl who she's dealing with a lot of stuff. She's dealing with a lot of drama, a lot of stress, a lot of all of that. But the romance was the first time I saw a romance between two girls that felt like the other romances I'd read, where it wasn't really stiff or weird or like oddly trying to teach me something. It was just like, these girls really want to kiss and they really are like into each other. And I was like, I didn't realize that could happen. Like, I assumed if girls were dating, they were very chaste and like held hands, and that wasn't the case. But I think that really like opened my mind to how things could be. And I'd really love to replicate that for other teens.
That's stunning. I love the answer from all of you. And I love that, you know, Sapphic romance is just like, I love that nowadays we can, like for young people, you can go on TikTok and search any of your books and find them right there. And as Jen was saying, perhaps growing up for you, you had to seek it out a bit more. Whereas now we have a little bit more. Obviously, there's still work to be done, but I love that for us. So I'm going to move on to the second question. I hope that's okay. So this question is about the books featuring young people in love and experiencing a whole range of emotions. What was your writing process and how did you tap into all of these emotions?
I can go.
Yeah.
My writing process is really chaotic. I'm not much of a planner. So I feel like my characters kind of hold my hand and lead me through the way, which before I started writing, I did not understand how your characters can like change your mind on things, but they truly can. So I caught a lot up on just, the feelings that I had when I was young and I was first realizing that I was into women. It's a really terrifying realization, especially if you haven't been around, other women who like women. So really tapping into younger self. And I also had a really great kind of focus group that I talked to about how they experienced coming into their own identity and figuring out who they were. So that helped me a lot as well. But yeah, it was a lot of opening emotional doors I thought I had closed a really long time ago. My therapist was very proud of me, and kind of peeling back the pages and, seeing the impact and the growth that I've went through over the years.
Yeah, I feel like my writing process is it was hard because of the pandemic. The book is supposed to be this really bright and happy rom-com, and I think it is that, but I kept getting notes like this isn't funny or this isn't happy. And I was kind of like, man, I haven't left the house in like 3 months. It honestly was a little hard because my editor would be like, I'm not getting the rom-com vibes, and I'd be like, I don't know what to do. So I took a lot of breaks from it, and I also watched a lot of like teen movies to try to get the joy of that feeling because I felt so removed from it. But definitely lots of editing.
Oh, that's so lovely to hear. May I ask what teen movies, just for anyone who's interested?
Yeah, I love 10 Things I Hate About You. I've seen that many, many times. And then I tried to watch like queer ones. What's it called? I'm sorry, the last of it, the half of it.
Yeah.
On Netflix, which was really, really lovely. Definitely 10 Things I Hate About You. Like John Hughes movies, which I expected would be more fun than they were. Like it was a little like they didn't age well. But those were like my top two.
Oh, I love that. And Jen as well.
Yeah, so I actually started writing If Tomorrow Doesn't Come in 2012. And when I first wrote it, it was a straight romance. And it's funny because all the characters that were in it have all just shifted in terms of their like who they are. Like the roommate used to be like this guy that came home from school, and there was a romance there. Obviously, between 2012 and now, I kind of had my coming of age experience. I do think a lot of queer people have this coming of age later in life. Could be in your 20s, your 30s, or like your 80s, So I think as I was writing, I was not mirroring my own experiences exactly, but the book, of course, just tended to drift towards my interests and what I was going through. And so, Avery figured it out a lot sooner than I did, actually, the main character. So yeah, this book really grew up with me, and like I really love it, not because I think it's perfect, but just because it really captured this really huge chapter of my life. So I was really tapped into those emotions already. But now when I'm writing too, first of all, I just have big emotions all the time. Like, I feel like I'm still the same person I was now than I was when I was 18. So I'm always feeling big love, whether it's like romantic or friendship or otherwise. So it's pretty easy for me to access, but I also have playlists that are just like all these love songs and all these falling in love songs or yearning. There's a lot of Sapphic yearning. Like that's really what I'll turn on if I'm trying to write a scene and I'm just not in that headspace. I'll pop that music on and it takes me there pretty quickly.
Oh, that's so lovely. And I feel like, Jen, you already know what I'm going to ask. Who, just for everyone listening, who features on these playlists?
Oh my gosh, I can tell you. So the Aces are a big one for me. They're this pop band that I really, really love. There is some Taylor Swift, as one does, of course. Let's see what else. I got Joy Aladakun, who I love and writes a lot about like mental illness, and falling in love with yourself. There's some Haley Kiyoko, Tegan and Sarah, Betty Who, Fletcher, of course, King Princess, Muna. That's kind of the gist of my If Tomorrow Doesn't Come playlist.
I love this. I feel like I have a playlist pending already just coming from this. And it's so lovely. I think there's like a binding thread between everything that all of you said, which was that writing is a communal practice, which is perhaps why it was harder during the pandemic, especially because when reading the book, it's often like quite communal, and just like growing up itself, like in order to get there, it involves a whole community. You know how they say like it takes a village. Perhaps that's the same with books. But talking of your books, let's the next question. I feel like I saw a little bit of fear, but no, this is a good one. I want you all to describe your books in 3 words. This is really important for everyone listening because I feel like we all have different perceptions of books. So hearing it straight from the authors themselves is going to be wild. Brenna?
Okay, I sat with this one for a little bit. First one would definitely be discovery. In more ways than one with Sapphire's story. She discovers herself, but she also discovers, who she is and her history. The second would be betrayal. And the third is not one word, but it's 2, but first love, just the madness of it and how you feel it so deeply. Especially, the first relationship with another woman is typically very heightened. So those would definitely be the 3 words that I would stick with.
I love that. Jen, are you ready for this?
Yeah. I think emotional is the first one that comes to mind, and I tried to portray a really wide range of emotions, not just like the deepest type of misery and sadness, but also the flip side of that, and this like ecstasy around first love and finding yourself, and really wanting to live and choose life even when it's not easy to do that. I think a lot of people seem to think it's devastating. That would be my second word. It's funny because I've spent so much time with the book now that when people will tell me it made them cry, I'm like, really? But I get that a lot, so I guess I have to throw that in there. And ultimately I think it's hopeful. I felt like I really wanted to meet readers where they were at if they're in a really dark place and meet them there, but ultimately kind of take their hand and guide them away from that. I hope by the final pages, my biggest hope for readers is that they come away from the story with a new found hope for their own lives, and for, better days ahead, even if they're going through something really hard.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. Cameron, have you got 3 words?
Yeah, I said fun, and cute, and then I said the cure, which is 2 words, but I feel like the title comes from the cure. And I also, this is so corny, but I was like, she's finding the cure to her lost vibes because she doesn't really know what she wants to do. I know. I was really struggling. But yeah, those are my 3 words.
Oh, I love that. And I love like the expression of like all the wide range of emotions that we were just talking about, especially queer joy. I think that's so important. So thank you for sharing that. And moving on to the next question, we've touched on this a little bit, but would love to delve more into it. Who are your biggest queer literary inspirations? I'll give you a little bit of time to think, not too much, just a little bit. And whoever wants to go can go first. Otherwise, I will be picking.
On the adult side, I read really widely. I read a lot of children's books, like middle grade, and well, now like board books because I have a baby, but like all the way through adult and a lot of different genres. So I'm kind of all over the map in terms of where I draw inspiration from. Carolina de Robertis is a non-binary lesbian writer who writes these incredibly gorgeous, devastating political books. And I feel like people are sleeping on them because I feel like they're like one of the greatest writers of our time. But in terms of YA, I really love Jazz Hammond's We Deserve Monuments. That book really captures like the feelings that I want to capture in my work too. And I also was really inspired by Kelly Quinlan's self-published debut novel, Her Name in the Sky, which is really wrestling with like religious trauma and, Sapphic love in that environment. And Emily Danforth's Miseducation of Cameron Post was another really formative book for me. That was like one of the earlier published, I think it was published in 2012, maybe like around when I started writing my book. But that was one of my earliest introductions to like Sapphic literature and really stuck with me. And that was the first time I felt like seen by a character, like, oh, I totally get, her like gender expression and sense of humor and her feelings. And I felt really like seen by that book.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Brenna, do you have anyone to add?
Yeah. Mine are a bit more like older, but I have tattoos for both of these. I love Emily Dickinson. I think even though she wasn't like, she was never openly queer. I think like her love for Sue was just really, really beautiful. And I think that she has a way with words that it's absolutely stunning. And then actually Sappho herself, I started looking more into her during COVID actually, and just started delving into her poetry and just like the bravery of being able to put those words on paper, knowing at any time they can be found, when obviously, Sapphic, obviously wasn't established and most likely frowned upon. Those are two of mine that I just absolutely adore. So I got tattoos for both of them. But yeah, those would be two of mine.
Oh, may I ask if you want to share what are these tattoos?
Yeah. So I have one that says forevermore. That's from one of my favorite lines that Emily has. And then I also have 3 dried flowers that she pressed in a herbarium. And I have my tattoo artist size them down. But they were flowers that she had apparently given to Sue, and then she pressed them in a book. And then for Sappho, I have actually the death of Sappho. It is a painting. And so that was like it's my most detailed tattoo by far, but it's actually her standing out on a cliff. It's like my favorite piece of art to ever exist. So I got that tattooed on the back of my calf last year.
That's stunning. And we love a literary, like inspired tattoo. Like we can really see those inspirations that
Yes.
You've taken it seriously.
Always.
I love that. Cameron, have you got anyone to add?
Yeah, I think mine are mainly like YA adjacent or like related. Or yeah, well, I was gonna say Casey McQuinson is like a big one for me. And I guess it's new adults or adult and YA. I love their books, and I love the joy, and I love sort of seeing queer people in these like traditionally straight like genres of rom-coms, and just having queer joy is really, really great to me. I also want to say Lorraine Hansberry, who wrote, she was a playwright. She wrote like A Raisin in the Sun. She didn't really, not that I know of, like none of her produced plays concerned like queer couples or queer topics, but I feel like her being like a lesbian Black woman during the 50s, like to be the first Black woman to have a play produced on Broadway was kind of insane. Like I can't wrap my mind around that. And I love to read like her journals and like her diary entries and just her thoughts about writing, but also being a Black woman, being a queer woman, and what she felt her responsibility was to other people. Um, and then I just want to say, these are all over the place, but Rachel Lippincott, I really love, and I guess also her wife, Alison Derrick. I know it's four people, but I really loved their co-written book, She Gets the Girl. It was so, so fun and sweet. And I'm also just obsessed with like wives writing books together. Like, that's so romantic to me. And it's so sweet. And I'm like, why can't I be you? You know?
Honestly, couple goals. And I love how we got like such a range of different literary inspirations, and how I'm sure that everyone listening will be able to grab from different genres. And I love like I just love all these inspirations. It's so nice. I feel like I'm gonna write them all down and definitely like research anyone that I didn't know. And I hope everyone else is going to as well. This kind of follows on, and I think this is one of my favorite questions, and I'm really intrigued by your answers. This one is, if you could give your younger self any advice, it could be romantic or anything in that sense, but let's stick to romantic maybe, advice, what would it be? So if you could give your younger self romantic advice, what would it be? But also any other advice as well. I would love to hear.
For me, like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Jen, you go right ahead.
Okay. I think when I was dating when I was younger, I always felt like if every single person was not in love with me, there was something wrong with me. And like I was like inherently flawed. And someone breaking up with me or not wanting to date me meant that I was like a bad like I don't know, I just like internalized it so much, like, oh, you know, it's something wrong with me and that's why someone doesn't want to be with me, or whatever the story might be. But as I've gotten older, I've really changed my thinking on, you know, my inherent self-worth, and realized that dating is just the act of two people trying to find the right partner. And just because someone doesn't think you're the right partner doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. I just really internalized every rejection and like took it so personally, when ultimately like you're going to end up rejecting people. And I could see on my end when I was the one dumping someone, I'm like, there's nothing wrong with them, they're just not for me. But I, for some reason, the flip side, could not really feel that. So I feel like sad when I think back on how much I, you know, used my dating experience to feel bad about myself, when really it should have been like a more fun experience of going out and just meeting people and seeing if we're a good match. You know, ultimately you're probably not going to be the right match for most people. So I wish I hadn't taken it so personally and learned to have a little bit more fun with it.
That is so true. I'm taking mental notes right now. Honestly, I think a lot of us project a lot of things onto like other people's actions, and I think that's honestly one of the most important things not to do, especially when it comes to romantic situations. So thank you so much, Jen. I feel like Brenna, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I think for me it would be I guess the world is very large. When I got my first girlfriend ever, I was really scared that I would never meet anyone else. And I allowed a lot of things to slide that I shouldn't have. But I was just terrified that I wouldn't cross paths with anyone else, I guess, like another lesbian, for instance. I think sometimes growing up, you feel like the world is so small and you have your group of friends and you have your family. And it's terrifying to think that, you know, you're not going to meet anyone else if a partner is mistreating you. But the world is huge, and you will move and you will meet new people who understand and celebrate you and treat you how you should be treated. I think outside of the romantic thing, I would just tell myself that I'm going to be okay. I had a lot of internalized homophobia personally, that I had to work through for years. And I think still to this day, I'm still processing some of that. But I spent a lot of years trying to change who I was for the sake of other people. And I'm finally at a place where I don't feel that pressure anymore. But yeah, I think I would just want to tell my little self, it's all going to be okay. It all works out. Just take a deep breath. everybody comes around eventually. So
I'm so interested as well how like this whole kind of having these thoughts as well, like growing up and having this like internalized homophobia and then writing YA, how that like how that's reflected in your
yeah.
writing.
Yeah, a lot of the fantasy world is built off of like my own deconstruction of my religion as I got older. So it was good for me. It was very, very healing. But honestly, this book has done a lot for me. It actually was why I came out. So I'm out to my family after 15 years. Everyone's on their own timeline. That's another thing. So, this book in many ways has healed me, and I hope it can just offer a reader half as much as it's giving me personally.
Honestly, I'm sure that it's doing more than half as well for everyone listening as well. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was so personal and lovely. Cameron, have you got anything you'd like
I'm
to
like getting emotional, like listening to this stuff.
This is so nice.
Yeah, because I think I'm a bit younger, so I'm still like working through a lot of these things. I don't really have that much romantic experience, so it is just kind of like nice to hear like older like queer women like saying things are gonna be okay and it's okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. um I think one thing that I'm constantly trying to work on is to stop being so hard on myself. I think on one hand, I'm almost proud of how hard I am of myself because I'm like, this is what sort of gotten me, the successful things that I have in my life. Like, I have to keep being this hard on myself. But on the other hand, I just like, it's not tenable. Like, I can't keep doing that. And I should be kind to myself. So I think good advice for young people is to treat yourself how you would treat your friends. And like, hopefully you are a good friend. I'm assuming you're a good friend. But I just like compare the way I speak to my friends when they say like, I'm a flop. I am so bad at everything. I'm so kind to them and so generous. And I'm trying to speak to myself with the same, gentleness. It's really hard. um, and also I don't know if this is like productive, but I'm sorry. I really it's personally helpful for me to see like white men flop. Um I'm thinking of like The Idol and like um even just other random things. Like whenever there's like a white man who has kind of had every opportunity and like does things poorly, I'm like, this makes me feel so much better. And I know most people don't have that response, but I'm just like, if he's flopping and he's doing so bad, I'm really doing really well. That is really helpful for me. Yeah.
I love that advice. Honestly, I feel like you've all come through with different pockets of like key information that's going to be stored in my brain forever. So thank you so much for sharing all that like personal stuff about like failure and coming out and not being hard on yourself as well. It's so important. So again, thank you. And going back to advice as well, lots of advice being given, and we want more advice. So, what would your advice to young queer women and non-binary people who want to be published be? I feel like we could talk about this for a very, very long time. And to be honest, I think there are a lot of people here who are thinking, like, how do I get published? And how do I write a queer book or graphic novel or whatever anyone's trying to write? And also, I think there's a lot of thought about like how it's going to be received. So I'd love for you to all touch on that a little bit, if possible.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and I think my biggest advice would be to try not to make yourself a representative of like lesbianism or sapphic literature as a whole or queerness in general. I think it can be really, really difficult to write with clarity and like with your voice still intact when you are thinking constantly of how people will react, like just in general. or whether or not you're queer enough, or whether or not the story is lesbian enough. I really would try your very best to write for yourself first, and write what you would love to read, and try not to think about the market or readers or what people say on Twitter or Threads or whatever, or Goodreads. I think that is a really fast way to crush your own individuality. And that's the most important part to me, is what makes this author stand out, what is special about your voice. You don't want to be the same as everyone else, even if everyone's like, we all hate coming out stories, or we all hate sad stories, or whatever. Like, write what's most important to you, because there's definitely people out there who need those books.
Yeah. And like going back to what Brenna was saying, we're all on our own journey, and everyone on their journey needs different things. So I think that your point has probably relieved a lot of pressure off of everyone listening who's trying to write, who is writing, who's thinking about writing. So thank you for sharing that, like, gem as well. Brenna, have you got anything you would...
Yeah. I guess for me, and I think this ties back to a thread that's been this entire conversation, is build a community of people. Putting a book out it's scary, because you're never going to be everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. But build a supportive group of people that you can talk to, that you can process things with, and you can celebrate with. I know for me, like having my support group, when I flew out to London, 6 of my friends flew out from my book launch. It's a scary day, and having all of them there was literally, I felt like the luckiest girl in the entire world. I think the other thing would be just do it. Just be brave enough to just put it out there. You never know what's going to happen. You never know if someone's looking for exactly the story that you're trying to tell. So you could sit on your manuscript, and you could be scared that it's too much like another manuscript, or it's, too weird, or things like that. But the truth is, you'll never know if you don't just try and put it out there and see what happens. And if that's not the manuscript, then the good news is you can write another one. And your first manuscript, like, it might not work out, but you still did it. And that's something to be really, really proud of. So.
That is so, so true. You have to try, which is so important to like get in, because I think a lot of us kind of stop before we've even tried, or we are sometimes our own worst enemies, because we're like, no, it has to be perfect the first time round, but it really doesn't. But I did want to just go back to a point you made, Brenna, about like building your community. How did you go about doing that, if it was like a conscious kind of thing?
It's funny when you're writing well, for me, this is not everyone's experience, but when I was writing this book, like, I was in a dark hole writing it, editing it, getting things done. And so I wasn't the most responsive. I wasn't always on top of things, and I wasn't always going to social events, but I had a core of friends that like would always come over, and they would never bother me, but they would sit with me while I wrote. And if I had questions or I wanted to bounce things off of them, they would be there for me to do that. But they were just there to kind of hang out with me. I will say I got really, really lucky in that stance, but also I had a great online community too, that were super supportive and cheering me on every step of the way. So even if you can't have that physically, there is an amazing community online that is willing to be in your corner and talk to you and kind of cheer you on. So I always say that if you can find the right corner online, like your little niche, it can be a really amazing experience.
That is such good advice as well, because I feel like some of us, especially if you're writing like a queer book, you might not have the support network in person, but having that online support is like invaluable. So thank you so much for sharing that. Just before I come to Jen, I just wanted to remind everyone that we will be going to do a Q&A after all of these questions, and please do feel free to start writing them, to put them in the Q&A function. And yeah, Jen, I hope you remember the question.
I do. And I feel like I really just totally want to echo the other 2 authors, because you both said a lot of what's been true for my experience as well, around like publishing is a business, and I do think if that is your goal, it really honestly wasn't my goal for like most of the time I was writing it. Only in the later drafts did I decide to pursue that path. But if that is your goal, I would say it is important to kind of study it and like learn about how other people got published. There's so many different ways to publish now, whether it's self-publishing all the way through, traditional publishing. And they each have their pros and cons, and you can learn a lot from talking to other people. And there's a lot of good books on it, and different resources. Because I think it is like an opaque industry. Like there's a lot that people don't share or don't talk about. But it's been really empowering for me to learn from other people, like how does one person get an agent, and like what does that even look like, and how do you get a second book? And there's just so many questions I had, and I didn't know what like imprints were until like last year. Like it's just like there was just so much I didn't know. So I think if your goal is to publish, then to just really like, not that you're ever going to know everything about it. I feel like I'm learning things every day, but it is something you can kind of study. In terms of like the writing though, which for me, and it sounds like for everyone else, has always been the most important part. Like I would say two things to add, which is to be brave or in your writing. And what I mean by that is to write down everything that scares you, like things that you kind of don't even want to say out loud. And listen, like you don't have to share that with the world. You can go back and edit it. But I think fiction is such a powerful space to explore things because there's always like plausible deniability too, right? It's like, no, it's not me, it's the character. But I think for me that just like on a selfish level has really contributed a lot to my personal growth. And it's also like the things I put in the book that reflect things I was scared to say out loud. I've had people say made them feel less alone, and then that makes me feel less alone. And so like that's just been a really beautiful part of this experience. And I'm struggling now writing my second book to be as brave as I was the first time, because the first time I didn't think people were going to read it. So I really put out a lot. And now I know people are going to read it, which is amazing and also terrifying. And I'm really trying to push myself to still say the things out loud I don't want to say on the paper. And whether or not I feel ready to share them with the world, as we get into later editing parts, that's a different discussion. And I'll really try to be thoughtful around, how much of myself I want to give, because you definitely don't need to share all of your trauma or your experiences with the world. But I do, again, think fiction is a really beautiful place to say truths out loud, because you don't necessarily have to have them coming from you. They can be from different characters. And the second thing I would just say is to be careful whose advice you're taking in terms of people critiquing your book. Like, I know that when I was younger, I was in workshops with like older straight men, and like they didn't like certain things and they were never going to be my audience. And so I think if you're in a workshop or you're finding a group and you're getting a lot of advice from people, or they're criticizing your book in different ways, just be thoughtful around whose voices you let stay in your head, because ultimately they're probably not the people you're writing for if they don't really get what you're doing. Like even some of my very close friends have books that are just like very outside of what I write or read usually, and I love to read their writing because it's so much fun for me, but I know that I'm not a very good person to give advice on certain types of things, because I don't know, what the landscape typically looks like. So I'm like, I will read this to read it and enjoy it, but I probably am not the right person to ask. So just be very selective when you're having people read your book, because they might end up making you feel like it's not working, but it might just not be working for them.
That's so nice to hear. And I feel like one of the key points I took away from that was building an intentional community, and from everyone as well, like being brave and almost like writing like no one will read it at first, and then perhaps like moving forward, if you think, okay, I want people to read this, then like pushing for that, which is so cool. And just a reminder to everyone, please do put forward your questions, because we are coming to the last question now that I have, but I can ask so many more if no one else wants to ask any questions. So you've got to stop me by asking your questions. I always love to end these things with a sense of joy and hope. And I think we've spoken a lot about advice for our younger selves and perhaps the past. So what do you think is the future of Sapphic literature? And furthermore, how can we all better support authors and creatives? I feel like that's one that you might have to like digest and think about a little bit. But I am really excited to hear your thoughts on this because it's one of those questions that I feel like perhaps is not asked very often. So I am very intrigued. I feel like Jen, you seem a little bit ready, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I can go. I think for me personally, as someone who still has like a lot of questions about my gender and like who I am, I think I'm excited to like see that explored in Sapphic literature as well. Like I sort of, it's like labels are really powerful and can be very empowering, and they help you communicate who you are to the world. But I think there's a lot of people too who like aren't sure, or who like try out one label and a couple of years later they're like, actually, this one fits. And so I think like exploring gender in fiction is really really cool, and I'm seeing a lot of authors doing amazing things with that these past few years. And I think like there's so much room in the YA market, especially to have like trans women writers, trans feminine writers. There's like some really cool genderqueer books coming out now, and I'm just like excited to see what people with different voices and perspectives have to say. And I think we're like, some doors are opening. There's some really, really exciting books coming out, in the next couple of years, but there's so much more I feel like that needs to be said and explored. And so like, I'm always trying to like look at how I can open those doors, but I feel like the more people are vocal about, needing more diversity in the Sapphic space and like just YA in general, I feel like hopefully eventually, those doors will start to open more and more.
That's so nice and hopeful. And I feel like we've all heard different comments about like Sapphic literature, that it's getting saturated, that this and that. But it's so nice to hear you say like there's still so much to write about. And to be honest, there probably always will be. So that's so nice. Brenna, I would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot more that needs to be explored. When I hear that somebody has read every Sapphic book, I'm like, are you sure? Because it's a growing like genre. I'm seeing deals come through of really exciting Sapphic novels. But I think for me, one of the greatest shifts that I've seen, and we've talked about this, is a lot of the stories are shifting more towards like Sapphic joy, queer joy. So that's really, really great to see. And I think it was Cameron that maybe said something about seeing two women fall in love. Sorry, I don't know if there's a lawnmower. Seeing two women fall in love, and like there doesn't have to be anything else but that. And just seeing like, or seeing two Sapphic people fall in love, and just seeing that normalized. I love a Sapphic rom-com where it's just silly little love, and they're just, they're trying to like fake date or avoid each other or something like that. So I'm really enjoying seeing that shift as well, that queer people are getting their time of just romance, and it doesn't have to be anything else. It doesn't have to teach a lesson. It doesn't have to change your life. It's just fun little stories that you can read on the beach or before you go to sleep at night, and you can giggle and kick your feet in the air. So that's what I am really enjoying seeing. But as far as supporting authors and people who are trying to make, moves in the industry, buying books and things like that is great, but I know that not everyone has access to, be able to spend the money and support. But online support and watching those TV shows and things like that, and showing that you're invested and that you want more, speaks really loudly to the people who are at the helm controlling what is put out. So really supporting your favorite Sapphic authors, or upcoming authors, or your favorite TV shows. I don't know if you saw that Warrior Nun got canceled, and there was such a viral petition to bring it back that another network has picked it up. So seeing that kind of support behind Sapphic shows and Sapphic media, I think is super important, and it doesn't have to cost you anything. It's just, putting your flag down and saying, hey, I want more of this and I'm demanding more of this, I think is super important.
I love that. I love as well how you said different ways to support that perhaps don't involve money, especially for younger people who have like the internet. I think a lot of us forget our power and forget like the voices that we have and the campaign that we can start just by saying like, that's not right. Like you need to bring that show back, or we want to hear more from this author, you know?
Yeah.
Cameron, I'd love to hear what you have to say as well.
Yeah, I think my main thing is I would love for Sapphic books to be greeted with the same fandom that MM books often are. And I'm hesitating because I don't want it to sound like a bitter thing. But I mean, we talk about this constantly. We see this, even Brenna was talking about these shows where there's two women in love that are constantly getting canceled. And it's really frustrating. Like, it's really sad. I love seeing things like Heartstopper and Red, White, and Royal Blue. Like, I love these things, but it's like we don't really have media with two women on that same level. And that's not to say that people aren't making these shows. They are making these movies sort of independently, but they never really seem to get the same push, the same fandom, the same group of, large groups of people watching it. So I would just love for something like that to happen. And I think we would all watch it. My friends and I joke, lesbians will watch anything. We will watch something if it's horrible, as long as it gets renewed and there are girls kissing. So I think that would just be really, really nice. And I'd also love sort of what Brenna was saying, like something like Heartstopper. And I don't mean to pick on Heartstopper. I love Heartstopper. Don't come for me. I love Heartstopper. But like Heartstopper, the main plot is literally they love each other. Like the main plot is we are in love. And there's other things happening, but it's really we are in love. And I would love to have that with queer women of color. I feel like oftentimes I'm told things have to be high concept, or there's this expectation that there's some sort of hook that we haven't seen before. And I find it kind of frustrating that that expectation is put on queer women, especially queer women of color, and it isn't for other people. So yeah, I would just love to have like a series where Black girls are in love and that's it, I would love that. I would love a series where Black girls are figuring out their sexuality. I would love that. And again, these things are being written, but I would love if like they got attention. So I think that's where I'm at.
I love that. And it is so true. We will watch anything and support it. So I love that. I love everything.
I don't like fantasy. I'm watching these shows. I don't know what's going on. I don't understand the plot. I don't know the lore.
I'm just here.
I'm here.
I love that. I feel like everyone really listened when I threatened to continue asking questions, and the questions have come flooding in. So I will move on to the Q&A section so everyone gets a little bit of time. Some questions are directed towards a particular author, some are not. So I think we'll start with, do you have any tips for how to write about love in a way that makes it real to the reader?
I think you simply must write a lot of drafts. And I say this as someone who loves romance, who reads it, who watches a lot of it. I thought it would be very easy because I love it. But I think you really have to fine tune these things. And I would recommend having your friends read it, or having other people who are really into this read it. Because it's hard to get right. And sometimes you might think something's really romantic, and when you read it out loud, when you talk about it with a friend, it doesn't come across the same way. So I would just say, don't be afraid to keep fine-tuning it.
I feel like that's going back to what we were saying about like intentional community as well. So I love like the thread running through all of these conversations. Brenna and Jen, do you have anything to add to this?
I think like one thing is to slow down, and I don't know whether it's like first person point of view or third, and really think about what's happening in that person's like body and also the emotions that are going around, whatever given, circumstance the characters are in, and just really zoom in and take the time to imagine yourself in that situation. But the second thing was I once went to see the author Britt Bennett, who wrote The Mothers, and I'm totally blanking on the Invisible, or her second book.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And she said that what she tries to do with characters is to really focus on what they need in each other that they don't have in their lives already or in themselves. Like what piece of them are they searching for in that other person? And that has stuck with me for many, many years, because I just constantly think like you can take characters who seem very, very different, or who wouldn't get along, but if there's something inside themselves that they're searching for in the world and they find it in another person, it just feels like this really beautiful, valuable thing. So I always try to think about that with my characters, like what is it that they're giving to each other that they don't find anywhere else?
That's a word. I love that. Thank you. Brenna, do you want to add anything? No pressure.
Just a little bit. Fantastic advice. Definitely. But I think my main thing is listen to your beta readers. Sometimes I'll write something and I'm like, that's it. And then my beta reader will be like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And when you're writing your book, like things make sense to you because you know what's happening. So you know the story and you're making the characters. And so for you, yeah, of course it makes sense. But for the people who don't live in your brain, it maybe doesn't make sense. So definitely get people who will be honest with you as you're editing and reading your drafts. And I think the other thing is it's not a one size fit all when it comes to love. Everyone has a different view of it, and it's going to look differently on the page for everyone. So, wherever your heart is being tugged, go with it, and then work with people around you and continue to draft and edit, like Cameron said. But just because you've read X amount of romance books and yours isn't mirroring that doesn't mean that yours is wrong. You just have a different view than other authors, and sometimes that view is really needed. So
I love that. I'm going to move on to another question, just so we can get through all of them because they're really interesting ones. I love this one. If you could pick actors to play your characters, who would you choose? This is so fun. I'm not sure if you have all thought this far ahead, but
I have. Actually, no. So Avery, my main character, she's a little easier because she's just like a redhead, and there's a lot of really talented young redheaded actors that I've. So Georgie Sadler did my audiobook, and she did such an incredible job. And I swear we did not pick her because she kind of looks like Avery, but when we did, I was like, wow, like she could also play her in a film adaptation if she wanted to. And she's just really incredible. So and then I've also thought of Sadie Sink because she's like around that age and is a really great emotional actress. So I thought she's really great. And I also love Liv Hewson from Yellow Jackets. They're one of my favorite actors ever. So one of those three, I think, for Avery. And I don't know, I'm obviously getting way ahead of myself, but for like Cass and a lot of the other characters, I feel like it would be cool to get like new talent, and someone who shared her background as a biracial person. And there's so many, like I feel like I don't know all the names of all the young actors now, but when I'm watching TV, I'm always like taking notes of like who's out there just because it's fun.
Oh, that's so nice. I'm not sure if the rest of you have thought that far ahead.
I haven't, and I don't know actors and actresses that well. Now my Pinterest boards are chock full of people. They're not
New talent.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I based Ashes off Katie McGrath, particularly her role in Merlin. I was like, wow, this is a dream. But outside of that, I just this would one that I have to sit with for a while.
Yeah. I hear that, but I'm also intrigued as to whoever asked this questions, if they had anyone in mind for any of the characters, or if anyone had if anyone had anyone in mind, that would be really cool to hear about. I feel like we touched on this a little bit before, but would love to hear what is something you would say to someone, to a writer who doesn't know where to start, who's also a recovering perfectionist. Thank you for this question. Sounds amazing. I feel like we could maybe breeze through this one because I feel like we touched on it a little bit, but maybe not on the perfectionism stuff as much.
I would say write fan fiction because it's so freeing and you really stop being a perfectionist in the way where you're like, I have to be a literary genius. You're just like, I love these characters. I'm gonna like put them in a funny situation and make them kiss. Like I wrote so much fan fiction growing up. And like could not recommend that more as a writing practice, because you really do figure out too like what's exciting to you. Like you just kind of in fanfic and you're like, oh yeah, they went to the mall, and then all this stuff happens that you really wanted to happen. So I feel like it just like leans into big emotions in those big moments and like teaches you how to write like what's exciting, and hopefully you don't feel too much pressure around it, which might help with the perfectionism part.
That's such good advice.
Fan fiction is amazing to write. I think the other thing is like your first draft is not going to be your last draft. So just put the story that you want to tell on the paper. I can promise you that it will improve and you will learn the characters and your writing will improve as you go. But that first draft is just for you. So tell your story, put the words on the paper, try to resist the urge to edit every 3 seconds, which is something that is very tough. But that first draft, it's like yours. And I think that's really important to remember, that the first draft, no one's first draft is perfect. Even the best book you've ever read, their first draft was probably a mess too. So
yeah, I wanted to say I'm writing a screenplay right now and I'm also having this struggle. It everything Brenna said, it is just a first draft, and I always had this issue, and I'm now having this issue with the screenplay, where it's like you're constantly comparing what you're writing to a finished product, and like you don't even know how many edits they went through. One thing that I really like to do is, this is with a screenplay, which maybe is not as helpful, but on screenplays at least, a lot of times if you find a screenplay to like your favorite show or favorite movie, it'll say how many rounds of revisions they did on the first page, and it's usually like 10. I found the pilot for Mayor of Easttown, which I think came out last year, and it was like they date it too, so you see how long they were working on it, and you see how many drafts they did, and that's always been really helpful for me to like remember like the first draft was bad. And I also think writing something really self-indulgent like fan fiction, but also like maybe something else that you decide, hey, this is not going to be super serious, can be great. When I was during pandemic lockdown, I wrote a full romance novel that was essentially a self-insert with me and an Italian actor from the old guard, and no one is ever seeing it. It's never making the light of day, but I wrote it because I wanted, like, I don't, a lot of my friends like don't do this, but I write just to write because I like to write. And I know it changes when you become sort of a professional and you want to publish things. But for me, if I write something and I decide not to publish it, it's not a loss for me. I think it's really helpful to have like a whole binder of books that are never going to see the light of day, because it's just you investing more time in yourself and figuring out how you write and how your brain works. But yeah, no, just know. And it's so hard to like tell you because you haven't gone through it yet, but just know how many rounds of edits we've all been through. It's crazy. Like you pick up a book off the shelf and I can guarantee you maybe 5 rounds, just minimum. Like it's, don't compare yourself.
I love that. It's so important to actually try and do things. And all, like, I think, Cameron, what you're saying is kind of writing as if no one's watching, which is such good advice. I feel like we're coming to a really nice end. And I want to end with a lovely kind of futuristic question. And if you can't answer this like properly, then would love to hear an abstract answer. But what are you working on next? Or what would you like to work on next? Like different genres? Because I know there was another question where someone was asking if there's any genres you'd like to try, but we would love specifics if you can give specifics.
I can go.
Yeah.
I wrapped a YA contemporary novel about a month ago and shipped it off to my agent. It's about a golden girl who realizes that she likes girls, and you see her work through that and try to understand how that portion fits into who she is, like the bigger picture. I never saw myself writing YA contemporary, but now that I've done it, it was so fun, and I had such a good time. So that's currently what my main focus is right now.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing.
These questions are hard for me to answer because I'm always working on like 12 things at once. I'm writing a rom-com screenplay, which is really fun. And I wrote a YA that my agent currently has. And then I also randomly decided today that I want to edit a YA I wrote a few years ago. So who knows what's going on? Who knows what's happening?
Very exciting, Jen.
I'm really excited you're writing screenplays, by the way. I'm working on my second novel, which is it's about climate change and kind of like trauma and recovering from, or I guess like how to dream in a world that feels really impossible and hopeless. But it's about this high school soccer player who is like really, really close with her best friend. They're inseparable. They're going into their senior year. They're the captains, and they're finally going to win the championship. Like they always lose to this one private school, and they hate them. And this main character is a hothead. Like she is constantly in fight mode, always getting off on people, just like cannot keep it together. But right, like at the start of their season, a hurricane hits and their school is essentially wiped off the map. And she has to go to the private school because that is the school that like will take her. And so it's really about like friendship and, how to keep people in your life when circumstances change, like how to come up with new dreams when the ones you've focused on for so long are ripped away, and how to find love and hope for yourself and other people. So it'll have a lot of similar themes to my first one. I did an interview and one of the comments, which I know I shouldn't read, was just like, "Oh, the end of the world again," and I was like, "No, it's different." but it is a lot about love and like queer romance. I'm doing like a little bit more with gender and stuff, so I'm really trying to be like I said, like brave around it, but hopefully have some fun too. Like I'm writing a character who's pretty different from me, so that's really freeing in a lot of ways too, because I can play with that and have her do things that I probably wouldn't do. So I'm enjoying it. But.
That's so lovely, and it's nice that, well, I can literally hear your voices, but I can hear your voices in all of the different things that you're doing. And honestly, I think we're all so excited for them. So just make sure to give us specifics the next time we ask questions as well, because we're very, very interested. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone who's listening, who's managed to tune in. Thank you for your questions, and sorry if we didn't get to them. And yeah, it's always hard with these online events because sometimes you don't want to end it abruptly, but yeah, we are coming to the end now. So yeah, big thanks. And yeah, feel free to say anything, any closing remarks if you want to, even if it's goodbye.
Thanks for coming on an evening. That's really special. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you for being interested in listening to us talk for an hour. It's really cool. So appreciate it. And thank you for hosting. So fantastic. So
Thank you. I hope everyone can feel that I contained a little bit of excitement just so I wasn't screaming what book's next. But yeah, it's been so lovely. Thank you for having me, everyone, and for listening to so much of my voice as well. I'm sure you're all sick of it now. So let's sign off. Bye,
Thank you so much.
everybody.
Bye.